unintended consequences. I only have the privilege of sharing this time with you from the pulpit once per year. During Canvas time, I was asked to do a testimonial along with Andrea, as did many others. Although I've heard countless numbers of these over the decades I've been a Unitarian Universalist, I had never been asked to do one before. To my surprise, I had difficulty containing my thoughts in the brief time allotted, which was so frustrating that in large part, and the contemplation of a name change for our church, it prompted me to expand on this today. Usually, testimonials revolve around what we get out of church, like the great music, ministry, and religious education available here. We do have all of that, and a bunch of friendly people who seem to like each other as well. It's a great place to be for all these reasons. I'm sure you are all waiting for the but, which must come in order for this sermon to have a topic. Here it comes. Although all those things are true, and I do feel that way, as I prepared my remarks for the Canvas in the context of our having decided to consider changing our name, that it was none of the reasons mentioned that caused me to be an, I hope, faithful member here since 1999 and a UU since 1968. The reason I am here is that my religion is Unitarian Universalism. So I would be here even if the nuts and bolts aspects of our functioning were not as top-notch. I just feel more compelled to try and fix them, and I feel obligated to do so. When I act in my life, I do so as a Unitarian Universalist. When I uphold the inherent worth and dignity of every person as I do patient advocacy at Vancouver General Hospital, I do so out of convictions formed and affirmed here. I believe in what we stand for, and I feel grounded in our history and tradition. Let me switch gears quickly here and see if this helps clarify what I'm trying to convey today. When I was growing up, I would not have had to explain what religious belief means, at least in a church. In the 1950s, a church or other religious affiliation was expected. Many of our UU fellowships started at that time because of the motivation of some to have an acceptable answer to the inevitable question, where do you go to church? I recently signed a 3-year cell phone contract when I acquired one of those trendy iPhones. In fact, the phone was an inducement to get me to say that I'd pay an exorbitant monthly fee for a 3-year contract. I admit, I'm enamored with my new gadget, but in 3 years, I'll comparison shop and decide what phone and company, if anyone, I'd like to be with. The same is not true of my faith. When Canvas time comes up, I don't think of it as an annual contract. It is more like an insurance contract on the well-being of my soul, and by that I don't mean a ticket to heaven. I think we have an important perspective it is vital to maintain in the world, and that I'm obligated to enhance and promote it, but not by dogma or any compulsion outside of my own conscience. I need to add that I'm speaking personally. One of the things I like in my work as a hospital chaplain is the only power I have is the influence I am or am not granted. I find, though, that in the hospital I find much less concern about what I do and do not believe than I find here at North Shore Unitarian Church. For a church without a creedal test, we seem awfully concerned about whether or not someone believes in a deity, to the extent that we habitually delete or alter references to God in the hymns and music we sing or hear. Even Joseph's musings at Christmas about whether his call should be followed was edited so that the call came from love rather than God, as Joseph surely thought, and as the music was written. For people who seem to be preoccupied with the finer meanings of church, this seems to be a curious apathy to the misuse of language and meaning. And for those of us who do believe in a higher power, this is a denial of respect for our beliefs. They must be downplayed even in the sources which have belief as a prime factor in decision and discernment. Peter Morales, the Unitarian Universalist Association president, referring to Americans, but I think this applies to Canada, says the first question we tend to ask about a religious group is, what do they believe? And we differentiate among religions based on our broad understanding of their beliefs. Yet belief, he goes on, in the sense of agreeing on what is true, is a modern preoccupation. For Morales, religion is more about what we love and what we hold sacred, about what moves us to the core of our being. Indeed, Morales argues that belief is the enemy of religion. When we focus on beliefs alone, we tend to lapse into arguments that are at least tiresome and often dangerous. Now let's get back to church, because the word seems to be such a point of focus. Since current usage seems to be a concern in the context of how we present ourselves to others, I thought I'd check with the most current trendy source I could think of, which of course is my iPhone. I asked Siri, the voice wizard in the phone, what is the dictionary definition of church? The first 4 definitions were: 1, one of the groups of Christians who have their own beliefs and forms of worship. 2, a place for public, especially Christian, worship. 3, a service conducted in a house of worship. And 4, the body of people who attend or belong to a particular local church. Although the first definition certainly does not apply to us, the other 3 do just fine in describing who we are. One objection to calling ourselves a church I've heard repeatedly is that some in the community might think we are Christians. George Orwell in 1984 chillingly described what happens when a central authority controls the meaning of words. If one cannot find a word for something in a very real way, we cannot form our thoughts around it. There is no way to describe something which in many ways does not exist without the descriptor. In the public sphere, people who do not respect the rights of women to make decisions about their own bodies have tried to hijack the word life by saying they are pro-life. If that idea is accepted, it naturally follows that those of us who believe in reproductive choice are anti-life. I refuse to accept others defining a basic concept like life for me. I feel the same way about church. When I was a teenager who was growing up Jewish, it was a stretch for me to consider attending a church, but it was attention to the meaning of words that got me over it. When I began attending the Hartford, Connecticut Unitarian Meeting House, I was very concerned about attending what basically felt like a Protestant church. It wasn't until I wrote this that I realized that the official name of the Hartford Church was Meeting House, because I cannot recall anyone over the years who referred to it as anything but a church. When I first went to worship services, we were still using the old blue hymnal, which was replaced by the gray one we still use here. I was amazed when it came time to sing a hymn that the hymn we were singing had a bunch of pen and ink changes in the book. I was appalled because I thought someone must have defaced it. I got even more confused initially when I noticed that the penciled-in words were the ones that everyone were singing. As it happened, one of the projects the choir had was to incorporate inclusive language in a hymn each week as part of their rehearsal time. Words were important. I agree with Marilyn Sewell and Christine Robinson that our potential growth will come from people who are seeking more than a place which provides intellectual stimulation. We are here collectively and as a movement to foster spiritual growth and a sense of being responsible for something beyond ourselves. I believe a worshiping community is something almost all of us need. In everyday life, it is difficult to step back and consider the question of whether our lives are as they should be. A well-functioning church community, of whatever denomination, provides such a place in the context of care and love. It is easy to take potshots at particular churches that seem not to do this, but all churches are made up of imperfect human beings who sometimes fall short of the ideals they claim to espouse. We are no exception. If someone is of a more traditional Christian background in hospital and they voice doubts of how God will treat them, I remark that if perfection was required to enter heaven, Jesus would be lonely. As a universalist, I come by that honestly. When I served as a parish minister at Westwood Unitarian Congregation in Edmonton, I never thought to urge them to change their name to church, although there too I can't recall anyone referring to the place as anything other than church in daily discourse. It would have been gilding the lily to have embarked on a project to change the name. Why are we devoting our energy to this when there are so many pressing needs that our attention could be focused on? What message are we sending to the community? Who are we trying to attract, and what do we stand for? It is meaningful to me that the statement defining our movement in North America, commonly called the Baltimore Sermon, given by William Ellery Channing, had the title Unitarian Christianity. Unitarian was an epithet used by the Orthodox to try and read the early Unitarians out of the circle of Christianity. They refused to accept that, but they did begin to use the word Unitarian to describe themselves because it was congruent with what they believed. A significant minority among us worldwide and on this continent resonate with Christianity as they see it, usually viewing Jesus as a human being with special insight in the divine, whose life rewards study and reflection on it. And yet, I have heard people in this church tell visitors we are not Christian. This is theological gatekeeping. It sends a message to liberal Christians that they are outside of our circle. And while they can visit here, they cannot expect to have their spirituality in our circle of belief. This sounds like a creedal test to me. This problem is not unique to North Shore Unitarian Church. The very first sermon I gave as an intern, almost a quarter century ago, was titled, "Is Jesus a Part of the Faith of the Free?" in which I observed that in some of our churches, and I used that word, the only time one might hear the word Jesus outside of Christmas and perhaps Easter was when the caretaker fell down the stairs. Philip Hewitt observes, "I am old enough to remember personally that when I came into the movement in Britain, there was very little question that its chief focus was to present what might be called the best of Christianity. While in the U.S., in that same era, the denominational publication was called the Christian Register. While it may now be a minority stand in the English-speaking world, there are certainly some among us who feel it very strongly. Overall, we now seem to have relinquished that role to liberal elements in some other denominations. But by doing so, we don't seem to have increased our following. I have noticed that there is a tendency here to be upset when something is presented that does not conform to one's beliefs. In a church like ours, it should be inevitable that this will happen. Our mission statement, which we read every week, says we welcome all to our caring community and foster spiritual growth free of dogma. Sometimes I think we need to put an asterisk on this, modifying it so that those with spiritualities that disturb our own sense of complacency in our own beliefs, whatever they are, understand that they need to be discreet about these other beliefs. Those who have this tendency often come from churches that have given them bad experiences. They have had their spiritual questions stifled. They left angry, and when they find this place, their anger has not abated. And so, like some who are abused, they duplicate this behavior in an altered context. It is easy to tolerate those who are similar to us. It is dealing with differences that tend to be challenging. Many years ago, I taught an adult curriculum called The Haunting Church. It has been revised, and I believe it's now called something like Religious Roots and Wings. In those sessions, the group discussed what they liked about their former churches, temples, etc. The goal of the course wasn't to convince them to return to their faith of origin, but to remind or show them that we are a product of our cultures, which, because they are human, have their strengths and weaknesses. It stunts your spiritual growth to be stuck in an angry, reactive place. It is far more personally fulfilling to contemplate what feeds our spirits rather than what does not. Being subjective beings, we will react differently to various expressions. If we wish to be open to diversity, there will be some services here which leave us unmoved, and hopefully others which we find profound and life-changing. If we don't take a consumer approach to our faith, we won't leave grumbling when a particular experience doesn't meet our needs. I could have spoken up in a congregational meeting about our name change discussion or on the blog, but I don't want to debate this. For me, it is a faith statement, and regardless of what faith one has or what belief one has, if it can be proven, it is not a matter of faith or belief, but investigation. Faith is something we know is true, but cannot prove. Let me close with an encounter I had with a humanist in hospital who was dying of cancer. When I went to see him, he was not particularly receptive, but he told me he was a humanist. Since he had no religion listed on the census, I asked him if he wanted me to list him as a humanist, which is a designation we have. Surprised, he said yes. Nothing else really came from that conversation, but I went back to see him again. And since he was emphatic about this before, and it was really our only point of common contact, I mentioned that I had done it and changed his religion to humanist on our system. He looked at me. He got real close, really closer than conventional social distance would be appropriate, and said to me, I want you to know I have cancer. I know I'm dying, and I'm a humanist. What he was really telling me was his faith. It was important for him to have on the record that there were indeed atheists in the foxholes. He did not abandon his faith and seek out a mythical God at the end of his life, and I think the comfort I provided for him was the knowledge that he had proven his thesis. As I do with anyone, regardless of their personal beliefs, I just listened, because I try to facilitate acceptance and comfort at such times, not undermine it. I pray that we find joy in one another's journeys, rejoicing in our various paths, sharing our enthusiasm and our common quest for the sacred wherever we might find it. May we find in community a supportive place for us that also grounds us as it reminds us of what is truly important and what is trivial. And may we respect those who have come before and built what it is for which we temporarily have stewardship. Amen, and blessed be.